Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jeannie Rosner. I'm the founder of Soul Food Salon. I'm so glad you're here today. Our goal is to educate and empower us all to be healthier. And we do monthly events. Historically, they were in person and now they're on Zoom. We present different health and wellness experts ranging from MDs, PhDs, RDs, chefs, cookbook authors. So it's really fun events. Hopefully you've attended some, and if you want to, you can go back and look at some of the events that we've had. They're up on our YouTube channel, all at Soul Food Salon. So we have a website, soulfoodsalon.com, where everything that we've done in the past is available. All of our recipes, anything that we've done basically is up there. And many of our events have been recorded. Today's event is being recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow under Soul Food Salon. I also will send out an email with this salon video link tomorrow. If you're not on my email list, you can either email me, Jeannie, Jeanne at soulfoodsalon.com, or you can go to our website, soulfoodsalon.com, and at the top there is a link that you could register to be on our email list. So each year, Soul Food Salon partners with a different nonprofit, and this year we're partnered with Off Their Plate. And basically, Off Their Plate was started March of 2020 by a third-year med student at Harvard Medical School. This was right as COVID was starting, and what was happening was the cafeterias in our hospital were closing, and she saw that the restaurants in her area were closing as well. And what she did was she partnered the two together, where the restaurants stayed working and provided meals for the hospital workers. It was a win-win. And now they're present in 9 different major cities. They're present actually in the Bay Area, and that's the effort that we are supporting this year. It's now Off Their Plate is not only for hospital workers, it's more for the at-need community. And essentially a $100 donation helps employ a restaurant worker for 3 hours and provides 10 meals to the at-need community. If you feel so inclined to make a donation, go to my website, because there's a specific link that they've created for us for Soul Food Salon. And on the main About page, in the middle of the page, there's a little blurb all about Off Their Plate with a little video, and then a specific link for you if you want to make a donation. So I'm very active on social media, mainly on Instagram. Again, my hope is to inspire and educate people to be healthier. I post a lot of recipes, mindfulness things, maybe just something about the microbiome, just all different updated science. So follow along, please. I'm at Soul Food Salon. So our next event is on March 18th, and it is featuring Drew Ramsey, and he's a psychiatrist, and the salon is called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And what Drew does is he breaks down the current research in brain science, nutrition, and mental health, and he makes this connection of what we actually eat affects how we feel. So he has a book called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, which is coming out mid-March. You can pre-order it now. All of his information will be up on my website after this event under the event section, and there will be a link. You can subscribe at that or register at that point to come to his event if you want. And I will also send out an email shortly all about Drew with all the links to his TED Talks, to buying his book, and to registering for his salon. So again, that's March 18th, Drew Ramsey, and it's called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. So today I have the pleasure to introduce Dionne Detraz. We are going to, so Dionne is going to present for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. So just put your questions in the Q&A box. I will not interrupt Dionne during the presentation, however. So Dionne is a registered dietitian nutritionist. We met about 6 years ago. I heard her speak at an integrative nutrition conference. She was on a panel, and she was fabulous. And ever since then, we've been in touch with each other, and we've collaborated a little bit. So Dionne is originally from California, worked in the Bay Area at both Kaiser and at UCSF. And then a couple years ago, she moved to France with her family. In 2016, she started the Rustic Dietitian. And basically, Dionne specializes in helping people navigate cancer treatment with integrative and lifestyle strategies. She recently published a cookbook called The Cancer Diet Cookbook, Comforting Recipes for Treatment and Recovery. I'm going to let Dionne take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie, so much for that. Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for being here today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm so pleased that Jeannie invited me to speak with you about something that I'm really passionate about. Like Jeannie mentioned, I work primarily with cancer patients. That's my specialty. But as you can imagine, the immune system is a critical system for everything, right? So certainly within the world of cancer, but also in just keeping us healthy, especially in the wintertime, helping us fight off infections in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, there's just so many reasons to be conscientious and mindful about supporting our immune system. So I'm really thrilled to be sharing this with all of you, and I hope you are excited to learn a bit too. One other thing I want to say before we dive in is I'm sure if you're here, then you recognize just how important food is in helping us prevent disease and helping us stay healthy. And I really believe that a healthy body begins with a healthy immune system. So for me, food is foundational to this. One other thought too I have is that, and you may already know this, but over 70% of your immune cells actually live in your gut, right? In the microbiome. So again, food is the primary thing that's influencing that environment, along with some other stuff, which we're going to talk about. So all the more reason for us to care about this topic. So let me just make sure I can, yes, advance the way I want to here. All right, so I want to quickly go over, just give you an overview of what we're going to cover for the next 40 minutes or so. So you have a sense of where we're headed. I want to take a little bit of time to review the factors that can deplete our immunity. So the things that can suppress the immune system, so that's on our radar. Then I want to go into basically the flip side of that coin and look at the lifestyle principles that will enhance our immune system. So beyond diet, what are some other things that we need to be mindful of? Then the third point, we'll spend most of our time looking at the foods and some dietary strategies, philosophies that will really support and enhance the immune system. And then finally, we're going to look at some supplements that might also be helpful, some of my favorite immune boosting supplements. And I have some recipes that I want to share with all of you from my book. And then, of course, like Jeannie said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So please, capture your questions as they come up, write them into the Q&A, and then we'll make sure to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. All right, so let's dive in. First, talking about the pieces or the factors that deplete immunity. We're going to go through just kind of one thing at a time here, and some of these hopefully won't be too surprising to you. So first and foremost, if anybody can tell what that icon might represent, sugar. It's a little donut, right? Sugar and refined carbohydrates. Unfortunately, things that turn into sugar, quickly turn into sugar in the bloodstream and raise blood sugar levels have been shown to suppress our immune system. And one piece that I think is particularly interesting that they've seen is people who drink just one can of soda has been shown to suppress the immune system 50%, and that actually extends for up to 4 hours. So you could see how, okay, if that happens once in a while, maybe not a huge deal, unless you're surrounded by a bunch of sick people, that wouldn't be great, but let's assume you're not. But if that was happening day in and day out, if you have a really heavy kind of sugar-laden diet, you could see how your immune system would just stay in this level of like 50% of function, right? And that obviously is going to set the stage for you to either pick up an infection or even increase your risks for cancer because the immune system is not doing all the roles that it needs to be doing. Another food-related thing that can suppress the immune system is really our processed foods. And I kind of lumped harmful fats into that category because there's some overlap in what's happening in the body. And just to clarify, when I say harmful fats, I mean things like fried oils, hydrogenated oils, even just really, how would you say, like industrial vegetable and seed oils like soybean oil, corn oil, things that are more pro-inflammatory. Now, the reason that these can be harmful for the immune system is sort of several-fold. Part of it is just a sheer circumstance of nutrient deficiency. So if you're eating a heavily processed food diet, then presumably that is replacing sort of nutrient dense whole foods that would otherwise be in your diet. And the immune system actually does require a lot of nutrients to run properly. So things like protein and omega-3 fats, but also lots of different vitamins and minerals. So if we're not eating those foods, if they're not coming into our body, then the immune system ultimately just isn't going to have what it needs to run at an optimal level. The other thing is the different additives and preservatives and, flavorings and colors and different things that we might find in especially ultra processed food. Those can also damage the immune system, specifically in what's happening in the microbiome. A lot of those chemicals are very irritating to the lining of the gut. They can sort of set the stage for something known as leaky gut. They also disrupt the microbial balance in the gut. And like I said in the very beginning, our gut is intricately connected to our immune system. So when things start to go awry there, ultimately that impacts the immune system as well. Now, actually, before I go forward, one other diet point that I didn't put on here, but I was thinking about later is if you're eating foods that you might have an allergy to, or you might have a sensitivity to, but maybe you don't realize it, or maybe you do realize it, but you just love the food too much and you're eating it anyways. Unfortunately, over time, that also irritates the microbiome, it irritates the lining of the gut, and it can also suppress the immune system. So something else to be mindful of, just when you're thinking about even what might be considered otherwise healthy foods, but if you're not digesting them well, that could become a problem over time. Now, some lifestyle pieces too that we want to be mindful of. So chronic stress, and I would even loop in here inadequate sleep. And I don't mean like just the occasional restless night sleep, right? I mean, everybody has that once in a while, but when you have chronic, unrelenting stress and poor sleep, that definitely does suppress the immune system. And on top of that, exercise. And what's interesting here is we know that moderate daily exercise actually has shown benefits in enhancing the immune system. It actually helps your body produce more white blood cells and more antibodies, and you actually have a better immune response. But what research has shown is on either side of that, if you have too little, like you're inactive and you're not doing any exercise, or if you're doing too much exercise, you're doing kind of intense, strenuous exercise day in and day out, both of those scenarios can actually lead to immune suppression. So really trying to find that middle ground of moderate exercise would be the goal. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to advance my slides. So let's flip that coin then and look at what are some of the lifestyle pieces that will enhance our immune system before we dive into more detail with the food. So I have a little map here that we're gonna look at. So diet, really, this is obviously very general. We're going to go into the details, but kind of a plant-based anti-inflammatory diet would be the foundation of the pyramid, we'll say, of what we're shooting for. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail in just a minute. So let's continue on our path here. And I want to take a second to talk about fasting. Now, I just actually a couple weeks ago gave a whole 45-minute talk on fasting as it related to cancer. So this could be its own topic, its own presentation by itself. But I just want to mention a few things that I think are really important for you to consider. So what the research is really showing around fasting, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different benefits of fasting, but when it comes to the immune system, it's really starting to be viewed as what we might consider nature's immunotherapy. It really seems to enhance the immune system in several ways. So first, I would say kind of twofold. The first path is that when you're fasting, your cells initiate cellular repair processes. So your immune system is actually kind of stimulated to go through and clean up dead tissues, dead cells, dysfunctional proteins, or even microbes. It even helps to target and remove viruses and parasites and different microbes from the body. So it can kind of clean up house, if you will, when you're fasted. And then something really cool that happens that was first documented by Dr. Walter Longo and his colleagues at the University of Southern California. If you're familiar with him and his work, he's kind of on the forefront of the fasting research. What they discovered is that when you come out of the fast, and first this was looked at in mice, but now more recently we're starting to see this in human studies as well, that when you start re-eating or refeeding, that it actually helps to produce stronger stem cells, so stronger white blood cells, which basically gives you a stronger immune system. So you kind of get this double benefit of helping to clean up house, and then when you eat again, having like a boost in your immune activity. So to me, this is really cool. I get excited about this kind of stuff. Maybe you do too. And I think what's important to point out here as well is that there isn't just one specific way of fasting in order to see this benefit. So as you may already know, there's a lot of different ways you could do fasting. You know, something as simple as an extended overnight fast, to more intermittent periodic fasting, to even longer extended fasts like 24 hours or more, right? So they are seeing this kind of stem cell regeneration in different models of fasting, which is encouraging to me. It doesn't mean you have to do like a week of not eating in order to get this benefit. So that's one way that we could really help to enhance our immune system. And then, of course, the opposite of what we mentioned in the previous slide. So having solid stress management, strategies in place, or what I would consider kind of daily stress support, helps to build resilience and helps to keep our immune system more stable. One way I like to talk about this with my clients is, it's not to say that we can't handle any stress, and I think that it's also important to point out that we're never going to achieve no stress in our life. Like, that's just not realistic. But I think what the goal would be is, when stress does come up, let's say over the course of the day, do we have strategies that we can go to that bring us out of that fight or flight, sympathetic space, and back into a calm, grounded, parasympathetic space? Because even just that shift of being able to go from sympathetic to parasympathetic switches the immune system back on, right? It's like it turns it off, it turns it on. And so the quicker we're able to do that over the course of the day, the more we are able to enhance our immune system and not let stress kind of deplete us ongoing. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing to that too would also be optimizing our sleep. And I know that this is often easier said than done, particularly if you really struggle with sleep. But the reason I mention it is just that it needs to be a priority. So if you are struggling with sleep and there doesn't seem to be a really clear reason or steps you can take to start to remedy that, then it needs to be investigated further. Because as we're able to get better sleep, this does enhance our immune system. There's even been some studies, like looking in the COVID world, that people who were more sleep deprived, who ended up getting COVID, had more complications from COVID. So we know that there's a direct immune connection with the quality of sleep that we're getting. And then I already spoke to this on the previous slide, but I think also just the importance of having moderate exercise in place. Not inactive, but not too much, is also going to help build white blood cells in our body and keep our immune system functioning in an optimal way. Hopefully all that makes sense to you guys. Remember, if you have questions that are coming up as I talk, please put them into the Q&A, okay? All right, so let's go into more detail around the diet. All right. I have 4 steps or 4 pieces to the diet that I want to go over with you. So the first piece is plant-based. And I just want to clarify what I mean by plant-based, because you may have your own definition of plant-based. I feel like there's some confusion at least in the online world, about what plant-based is. To me, plant-based is that most of what you're eating is coming from plants. It doesn't necessarily mean you're vegan. It doesn't even necessarily mean you're vegetarian, but it means the majority of what you're eating is plants. And this is important for many reasons. I mean, obviously in cancer, this is really important. But when it comes to supporting our immune system and making sure we're getting enough of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that our immune system needs, if we're not eating enough plants, we're just going to have a deficiency. We're not going to have enough of what we need. I love this plate. If you guys haven't seen it before, you might be familiar with it. It comes from the American Institute of Cancer Research. I love visual tools. I hope you guys do too. And to me, it just really kind of summarizes what does a plant-based plate look like. And in this example, there actually is still animal protein on there. There wouldn't have to be. It could be beans or soy food or something else. But you see that there's a lot of plants surrounding the animal protein, right? Colorful plants, whole grains. So this is where I always start. It's like that to me, again, that's kind of the base. Like we first need to make sure we're getting a lot of plants in, and then we can fine tune that. Now, before I move on, I just also want to point out that protein is actually really important when it comes to the immune system. Protein actually helps us build our immune cells. So if we are eating in a way that we're becoming deficient in protein, that could ultimately be a problem when it comes to just the function of our immune system or the depletion of our immune cells. It doesn't mean it has to be animal protein. Ideally, I tend to advocate for like a plant-based omnivorous diet. So we're kind of rotating through different proteins and getting a nice variety of protein in the diet, plants and animal-based. But the important piece is just that every time you eat, there is some kind of protein there, just to make sure you're not becoming deficient. And it's not like protein deficiency is a big deal in America. I just wanted to point that out to you though, so it would be on your radar. Okay, the second step or goal would be ideally to try to make the diet anti-inflammatory. And to me, anti-inflammatory really leads nicely to an immune boosting, anti-cancer based diet. This is, if you haven't seen this before, this is Dr. Andrew Weil's anti-inflammatory food pyramid. I think he did a nice job summarizing some of those ideal anti-inflammatory foods that we want to be aiming for. And you can see those first 3 rows there are all plants, right? So we've got the colorful veggies and fruits, we've got whole grains and beans, and we've got plant-based fats. And then we move into some of the animal protein, first with fish, because we know that has really strong anti-inflammatory potential. And then whole soy foods, different mushrooms, some herbs and spices, and green tea. We're going to talk about these specific foods more in a second, which is why I'm just kind of, summarizing them. But this would be the second place that I would encourage us to go. So we have mostly plants in our diet. And then within those plants, what are the anti-inflammatory ones, like kind of the real whole foods we want to be focusing on? Okay, now the third step, again, how do we, I'm trying to go from kind of broader to more specific. So the point here that I think is so important is the importance of phytonutrients. And phytonutrients are special compounds that go beyond just, carbohydrates, protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals that actually in research studies have shown to help boost the immune system, to help with disease prevention, to help lower inflammation, plus many other activities. Now, these are found in the colors, in the pigment. So this is why I really recommend people try to aim for a rainbow of colors. And I have to tell you, I've had many clients or people that I've taught where they've already done the plant-based thing, right? They're on that train. And maybe they're even really trying to get in the anti-inflammatory foods too, which is great. We can check off both of those boxes. But the color thing has kind of escaped them, right? Or it just hasn't been on their radar. And I wanted to put it here in this presentation, just really to remind you of the importance of it. And I go through a few of the colors here just to give you some ideas of what plants, what foods fall into those different color categories. But I want to point out that it's not just fruits and vegetables. Honestly, it's anything that provides color. So it could be spices, It could be herbs. It could be beans, right? Like all the different colored beans or lentils, or even the different colored grains. I mean, think about like wild rice or red rice or black rice, right? Like we can find color in a lot of different plant foods. So I want you to be creative. My goal for you would be to think through each color group and see if you can start including, at least one thing from each color group each day. And you see what I have some examples for red and orange, yellow, green. Blue, purple is kind of a combined category because their phytonutrient activity overlaps quite a bit. And same with the white, brown, there's some overlap in their phytonutrient compounds. But each of those color groups have different benefits associated with each of those colors, which is really why I encourage people, the more variety, the better, because then you're really taking advantage of all those different benefits. I'll be curious to hear what you guys think of that. If this is something that's already on your radar, if you've been trying to eat a bunch of colors, or if this is like a totally new thing for you. Okay, the fourth step is to really think through some of the specific foods that have been shown to have some immune enhancing, or I would also argue immune balancing properties, right? Because sometimes we don't necessarily want to stimulate the immune system more. I think about scenarios where there's autoimmune disease, or, if you're really prone to allergies or anything where there's kind of, or certain skin conditions like psoriasis, or where there's a hyperimmune response, you may not want more immune activity. You might need a more balanced immune activity. And so all of these foods have been shown to either support the immune system in one of those two ways, by either enhancing its action or by balancing its activity. And obviously this is not an exhaustive list, okay? But they're just sort of my top 10 favorites that I talk about all the time with my clients. So first and foremost is mushrooms. All mushrooms have immune boosting properties thanks to the beta glucans found in mushrooms. Now they are more concentrated in certain mushrooms. So when we think about kind of the more medicinal Asian inspired mushrooms like shiitakes and reishis and maitakes, these are going to have more concentration of those beta glucans. But even the lowly white button mushroom has been shown to have beta glucan activity. And there's even been some studies to show that it may help reduce the risk of breast cancer, as one example. So I really encourage people to just start with whatever mushroom you like and just try to get more of it in your diet. Ideally a few times a week, and then if you're open to it, really mix up the variety so you can get the benefits from the different kinds of mushrooms. And mushrooms happen to be one of the best immune balancing, like immune modulating foods. So whether you're hyperimmune or low immune, mushrooms could be really helpful. The next one is garlic. I could probably say the whole allium family, really, but garlic in particular, it just has so much, not just immune enhancing potential, but also antimicrobial potential, right? So it kind of helps our body fight off bacteria or viruses or fungus, different microbes that we might be exposed to. And it has really great anti-cancer research behind it too. So garlic is definitely one of those that I recommend all the time. Ideally raw, and it doesn't mean you don't get some of that benefit from cooked, you do, but raw is going to be more potent. So whether you just sort of lightly cook it at the end, or maybe you prepare it raw, like in a salad dressing or a pesto or something like this, garlic is going to be really powerful. Now, the whole category of vitamin C rich foods are going to be really helpful. So I think probably vitamin C is one of those that, we all know about vitamin C, hopefully. But I think that what could be helpful here is to just give some examples of what falls into vitamin C. So obviously the tangerines you see listed on this photo, all your citrus fruits, right? Your different citrus fruits. All of your berries are going to be great sources of vitamin C. Tomatoes and bell peppers and gosh, a lot of the fruits, kiwi, papaya, Even broccoli is a great source of vitamin C. So typically, if you're eating kind of a diverse, colorful, plant-based diet, you're probably eating adequate amounts of vitamin C. Now, fermented foods are another really important one, and this goes back to the microbiome piece, right? So, trying to choose foods that are going to really enrich the microbial diversity of the gut and keep it kind of happy and thriving. So, fermented foods can certainly help with this, and adding more of these foods in your diet. Now, I know we always kind of default to yogurt or kefir, which is fine. Those do offer some probiotics. Not everybody digests those very well, though. So you might choose a dairy alternative for those foods, or you might choose some other options. There's actually quite a bit of different fermented foods you could be choosing from. Things like raw sauerkraut. I say raw because if it's been, sort of shelf stable on the shelf for a while, it's going to lose quite a bit of its probiotic activity. So ideally you find it in the refrigerated section to have the most active cultures. So raw sauerkraut, different pickles, like different pickled fruits and veggies, things like kimchi or kombucha or miso, or different fermented soy foods like natto or tempeh. So I know that probably wasn't an exhaustive list either, but just to get you to start thinking about what are some fermented foods you could also add into your diet. And this is in addition to kind of all the other high fiber plant-based foods that you're eating, which is going to help feed those good bacteria. So it's going to help keep them alive and reproducing and, flourishing in your gut. Coconut is another great immune booster that's not always thought of. It's not always top of mind, but coconut is rich in something known as lauric acid. This is a type of fatty acid, which has been shown to enhance the immune system. And it's also been shown to have really good antimicrobial properties. So again, a bit like garlic, helping us fight off viruses and bacteria and whatnot. Coconut also seems, I think, again, because of this lauric acid component, is also really great for the gut. It's very kind of nourishing and healing for the microbiome. So if you are dealing with a lot of digestive stuff, coconut could be a nice addition for that purpose as well. Now, spices across the board. Okay, I pulled out ginger and turmeric here because I think they both kind of have the most research in this area. But we also know from just general spice research that excuse me, I didn't mean to go there yet, that we also know that they have a lot of overlapping compounds. So I would say, if you're not a big fan of ginger or you're not a big fan of turmeric, just start adding in any spices that you do like, because you will get some immune enhancing benefit and just even some anti-inflammatory properties as well. But we do know that specifically ginger and turmeric have quite a bit of this action in them, and ginger in particular is what's considered a heating spice, like constitutionally, and that actually has been shown to help us sweat, which can help to fight off infection and can help to reduce a fever. And there's been some studies showing that people who ate or supplemented with ginger had lower times of being sick and less spiked fevers. So I think when it comes specifically to, when we're sick or immune enhancement, ginger can be a good one. I don't have this on my list, but I want to point out too that just, again, thinking of COVID and the pandemic, that rosemary and thyme are actually especially good antiviral herbs. So when we're thinking about, trying to just boost our resistance and kind of help our body fight off any potential exposures to viruses, I would recommend rosemary and thyme. And within cooking, but also maybe even like as a tea, to get kind of a more concentrated intake of it. Okay, I jumped the gun a little bit earlier, but we also have omega-3 rich foods. So omega-3 fatty acids have also been shown to boost white blood cell production. They can also help the body fight off infection. And as well as, much like mushrooms, they can help modulate the immune system and modulate an inflammatory response. So this is obviously one I talk a lot about when it comes to cancer. But anytime there needs to be sort of extra immune support or even just extra healing or repair support, like post being ill or post injury, omega-3 rich foods are definitely in the mix. And as far as, what to focus on here, if you are an omnivore or if you're a pescatarian, then I would highly suggest doing fish, ideally 2 or 3 times a week, in order to make sure you're getting kind of a concentrated dose of omega-3s. On the days you're not doing fish, or if you don't eat fish, then making sure that you're getting as many plant-based sources of omega-3s as you can, which would be primarily from ground flax seeds or chia seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts are probably your most concentrated sources. And with this category too, it might very well warrant a supplement if you're concerned that you're just not, eating enough of those foods. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the supplement section. And the truth is, I was going to say Americans, but I would even argue that just most Westerners are typically not getting enough omega-3s in their diet. And I do believe that's changing, which is great because there's more education and knowledge about the importance of omega-3s. But that ratio of omega-6 foods, which is really prevalent in our food supply, to omega-3 foods is often skewed, which can influence our immune response. Okay, the next thing I have up there is bone broth. And I would say that there's good reason chicken soup has been the go-to remedy for colds or flus, right? There is definitely some research looking at chicken soup, looking at broths, and how this can help enhance the immune system. I have my favorite mineral-rich bone broth that I'll be sharing with you guys in the recipe section, which combines the bones from chicken, which you could do without if you're vegan or vegetarian, plus a lot of different spices and vegetables and even seaweed to really enhance the mineral content of the broth, which can be a great immune support beverage. And then finally, last but not least, which I guess is not technically a food, it's more of a beverage, but green tea definitely has to be on the list. And this is true for me in cancer as well. It's just one of those really optimal foods, I think. It's rich in antioxidants, especially EGCG, which I think is what we all sort of know it for. And EGCG has been shown to boost and support the immune system as well as regulating inflammation. So it can be a nice regulator as well. And I made a note here because I wanted to make sure I pointed it out to you that in one study, EGCG was found to be anywhere from 25 to 100 times more potent than even vitamin C, which is kind of like our go-to thinking, right? When we want to boost the immune system, as well as vitamin E. And then matcha, which is a specific type of green tea, is more than 100 times as potent. It's like more concentrated in EGCG than just regular brewed green tea. So any kind of green tea will give you some of those compounds that you're looking for, okay? Just to clarify. For whatever reason, the Japanese varieties of green teas seem to have more concentrated amounts. So they're going to give you more EGCG per cup. And then out of those varieties, matcha is going to have the most, okay? So all 10 of these things, not necessarily in any particular order, but all of them were definitely on my top 10 immune foods. And when we're trying to do what we can to really boost and support the immune system, personally, I'm trying to include as many of those as I can. It's nice when they overlap, right? Which is why some of the recipes I shared with you is like bringing in several at a time so that you're not eating each of those things individually. All right, let's talk a minute about supplements. And I know Jeannie and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I know this could like be its own topic, right? I'm sure. And maybe you'll have a lot of questions too for me in this area, but supplements is definitely a very popular topic. And there are lots of different, supplements that could reportedly help and enhance the immune system. I didn't want to go into all of the potentials. I really just wanted to pull out my top three, like the ones that I always start with when I'm trying to help someone enhance their immune system, or if just I'm trying to enhance my own immunity, right? Like the top three that I would turn to. And then I'll briefly speak to some of the others. Before I dive into this, though, I just want to make sure that it's on your radar that supplements can absolutely be helpful, but they're only going to enhance whatever else is already in place. Okay, so unfortunately, they're not going to replace the diet. They're not going to replace, getting good sleep, or they're not going to replace chronic stress. They're just not going to be powerful enough to outdo all those other pieces. So I do want you to consider about how they could enhance what you're already doing, but unfortunately, they're not going to work outside of everything else. Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so let's go. My first favorite immune supplement, which is probably not a surprise to you guys, is vitamin D3. For so many reasons. I think probably not the least of which is that we know that immune cells actually have receptors for vitamin D right on their cell surface. And it's been shown that vitamin D can help cells better target and attack bacteria and viruses, as well as help modulate inflammatory responses. So it really works on many different levels of how it can optimize our immune function. This is obviously very true in cancer, but also with autoimmune disease, and then definitely just in like helping us fight off infections. So I want to speak to just on a couple of other things to be thinking about with this. So there has been some research lately. I'm sure you've been aware about the vitamin D and the COVID piece. So we are seeing some studies that seem to correlate, like more optimal vitamin D levels, sufficient vitamin D levels with a lower risk of death from COVID. So kind of less complications when there's adequate vitamin D in place. I do believe that it could help your body, like sort of help fight off an exposure to COVID. And in the early stages of an infection, it could certainly help your body hopefully respond and fight it off better. But there is a caveat, because what we've seen is that if you do become infected and it's progressed, like it's moved deeper into the lungs, that then, without getting into a lot of the sort of the physiology of that, but what's happening is it's almost switching into this hyper immune response and this hyper inflammatory response. And there is some concern that at that point, the vitamin D might overstimulate the immune response. Like it might no longer be helpful at that point. So there is kind of, obviously you'd be working with your providers, right? To like know, is this happening? Should I stop some of my supplements? But there are sort of a class of supplements where at a certain point you would want to stop them. So that would be true for vitamin D. That would be true for elderberry, for echinacea, also for some of the like beta glucans. So just to have that, in the back of your mind. Now, for just general prevention, yes, definitely helpful to supplement. Now, as far as how much, this is obviously going to vary quite a bit depending on what your blood level is. So I always recommend, if possible, that you get your blood levels checked if you haven't before, or maybe in the last year, if you don't know what your levels are, because that will dramatically inform how much you should supplement with. And if it's quite low, your doctor may even recommend a prescription dose, right? In order to like really get it up as quickly as possible. Without knowing, I think it's pretty safe for everybody to start at 2,000 IUs a day. Even up to 4,000 IUs a day is probably fine. I routinely recommend that to my clients, but also with just the caveat, like it'd be great to get your blood checked as soon as possible, so we can refine that dose depending on what it tells us. Now, the second one is mushrooms. So we spoke about mushrooms in the food list, right? And it is important to be eating as much of the mushrooms as you can. But I would say that when we're really trying to enhance the immune system for various reasons, adding in a mushroom supplement can be really helpful. The polysaccharides, the beta glucans present in mushrooms are responsible for their impact on the immune system. And just like with the vitamin D3, though, there's a bit of a caveat here. So isolated beta glucans can potentially be overstimulating in that COVID scenario, okay, that I just presented with the vitamin D. But there doesn't seem to be that same impact when you supplement with like a whole food form of the mushroom. So not the isolated polysaccharides, but the whole complex. It seems to be more of an immune modulator as opposed to an overstimulator. So that's typically what I recommend if I have a client that I'm going to suggest, you know what, let's really try to bring in some mushrooms for a bit. I really like the ones offered from Host Defense. I know there's lots of good companies out there, but that's kind of my default. And I usually go with the Stamit 7 or the My Community, but they have a lot of other great products too. So mushrooms would be my next one, and probably, again, a more common one that I recommend. And then also the fish oil. So I spoke to that briefly in the food list as well. And I think there are many scenarios where it might just be not realistic for you to be eating enough omega-3s to get that benefit. So particularly if you don't like fish, right, it's going to be really hard to get enough just from plant-based sources. It certainly will help, but it still might not be enough. So in that scenario, a supplement could be helpful. I do recommend fish oil. Unless you're vegan, then an algae oil could be a great alternative because it still has the DHA component in addition to the EPA. And I usually encourage people to aim for somewhere between like 1 to 2 grams a day in order to be getting, a therapeutic benefit from the fish oil. And as far as supplements go, I personally prefer Nordic Naturals is probably what I recommend the most. Carlson Labs is another good one when it comes to omega-3 supplements. So as far as just like where to start, right, in the supplement world, that's where I would start. And this is also where I start even with my folks going through cancer who might even have compromised immune systems, right? And we're really, in that scenario, it's a little bit easier because they're getting regular blood tests and we can actually see how their body is responding to what we're doing. But I will tell you that I have seen people taking these supplements get their white blood cell count up. So I know even just from like anecdotal clinical practice, I have seen these be really effective. There's lots of other immune supplements that you could add in different scenarios, right? So probiotics could be one to do. I prefer to start with food-based forms, but there's plenty of reasons where you might want to bring in a supplemental probiotic, especially if you're having a lot of digestive issues. That might really help. Or maybe adding in extra vitamin C or zinc, right? Particularly if you're actively fighting something off, that could be really helpful. Things like echinacea, elderberry, those are all a lot of my own personal go-tos when I'm trying to support my immune system. So I don't want to say that those 3 are the only ones to consider, but they're definitely my top 3. Okay, so let's do a quick summary of just all the pieces here that matter, and we'll put it into one slide to keep it simple. So the foundation is really the colorful plant-based anti-inflammatory diet, then adding in as many of those sort of immune power foods as possible. Considering periodic fasting, I really wouldn't underestimate how this could be helpful. And if this is a completely new concept to you, you're not alone. There's plenty of people who haven't ever played with fasting. I would say just start with the overnight fast. See if you can start to extend that to 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours. Just see if you can start making that piece longer. Once that feels easier to do, it'd be much easier to experiment, with other versions of fasting. Doing what you can to enhance your sleep. So, maybe some different sleep hygiene to help you prepare better for sleep. I don't know if you guys can tell with the video, but I got blue blocking glasses. That is supposed to really help with circadian rhythms and sleep. Maybe even adding in sleep support supplements if you there's lots of different strategies you could try to enhance your sleep. Daily stress support. Remember what we said earlier, really trying to shift ourselves more into that parasympathetic space, instead of just hanging out in like sympathetic flight or fight all day long, which is really easy to do. I know, I've been there. So I get it. Like, it's really easy to just hang out and stress. But unfortunately, day in and day out of that is incredibly depleting to the body, and specifically the immune system. So that can't be, underestimated, the importance of that. Adding in moderate exercise, being mindful with your exercise, not too much, but not too little. And then, of course, supplementing when needed, or supplementing to enhance all the other pieces of what you're already doing. So I have 4 different recipes that I'm going to share with you guys. I believe we're going to include them in the links that will follow. So when you get the recording, you'll also get some links to my website, to my email address. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them that way. These recipes, and to my cookbook. I will say that, so all 4 of these recipes I pulled from the cookbook for you guys. And I just want to clarify that I did write this book for my cancer patients. Like, that was really where my heart was. I wanted them to have something to lean on to help them through their recovery, and, beyond. But in all, in full disclosure, these are also my personal favorite recipes. Like, these are the recipes I eat, my family eats, I cook for my friends, right? They are the recipes I love. And in order for them to have met the criteria for the book, they had to help support the immune system in addition to helping the body heal and recover from cancer. So I definitely think it could be a good resource for you too, if you're just looking for more immune boosting recipes. And I think that's it. I think that's my last slide. So now I believe we can open it up for questions. Let me stop the share. Okay. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi. Wow. I learned so much. That was just fabulous.
Good.
So great. So great. A
Good.
few standouts for me that I just wanted to kind of point out. So I personally, I totally preach eating the rainbow. I think that's so important, but I never really considered that grains and beans and spices were part of that.
Part of
I
that.
don't know. I just didn't put the 2 and 2 together. So I appreciate that.
Good.
You use the term phytonutrients, but I don't think you defined it. Can you define that for everybody?
Well, I don't know if I can give you a formal definition off the top of my head, but essentially phytonutrients is just like nutrients that are found in plants. So phytonutrients that are outside of the like normal macro micronutrients. So they're not protein, carb, fat. They're not vitamins or minerals. They're other compounds. And what's interesting about phytonutrients is, so besides providing the pigment of plants, they're also what the plant uses to protect itself when it's growing, right? So it creates these compounds to protect itself against pests or disease or, extreme temperatures. And this is also why in research studies, they've seen that organic food has higher phytonutrient content because the plants have to fight harder to stay alive. So and that another win for organic as far as that goes.
Great. Just to point out, you talked about garlic and that it's more important to eat it raw if you can. Do you want to just share like why you need to let it sit on the counter for 10 minutes before? Because I think that's an important point that I know Andrew Weil really preaches.
I know, I was going to say, you could probably speak to that as well too, because it's such a Dr. Weil thing to, yeah, but it's and this is, I mean, I'd say particularly with garlic, but there are some little rules like this with other foods too in different ways. But with garlic, when you first break garlic, right? So you press it or you cut into it. As soon as you do that action, it releases an enzyme that helps to break down and sort of activate the compounds, the phytonutrients in garlic. So you want to give it enough time to like sort of fully activate those nutrients before you cook with it or before you eat it, so that you get the full benefit, right, from it. And that is about a 10-minute window.
Right. So like,
thank you for pointing that out.
like what I do is if I'm going to make a salad dressing, for example, I will chop the garlic first, put it off to the side, and then mix everything up or, just wait the good 10 or so minutes with it.
Yeah.
Um, so you talked about food being immune balancing and can be balancing or enhancing. How do you know when a food is in what category?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair question. I think that's actually kind of hard to know just off the top of your head. I would say, like, my general rule of thumb is if it's coming from your diet, like if you're eating kind of a wide variety of food in your diet, I wouldn't worry about it being overly stimulating. I think where we really have to be mindful of that is when we start adding in supplements. So if we were supplementing things that were really enhancing the immune system, but that's not actually what we wanted it to do, right? That would be important to know. I wouldn't worry about food forms.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to go through as many questions as we can. And as Dionne said, if we don't get to everything, you can perhaps email her, and she's so generous with her time and her knowledge to
I'll
share.
try.
Okay, you mentioned ultra processed foods. Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to think of ultra processed is basically like it's not food anymore. It doesn't really even look like food, right? It's like a food-like item. So that could be that could be like, Cheez-Its or Doritos or Gatorade or I don't know, Twinkies. Like, do you mean like anything that's just kind of like it might be fun to eat, but there's just really no food left in it. That to me, that is an ultra processed food because there are different levels of processing, right? And I'd say minimally processed or even moderately processed that doesn't have a ton of added ingredients to kind of preserve it and keep it shelf steady could still be of a really healthy diet. I mean, technically, anything in a can is processed, right? So it's not that all processed food is bad per se, but certainly when we get to ultra processed, there's just no nutrient value left in that food. It's just all chemicals.
Okay, great. What is it about sugar that is so harmful when in excess?
Yeah.
That could be a whole talk itself too.
What's that?
That could be a whole talk itself
Oh,
too.
it totally. I know, particularly within the cancer world. Like, oh my goodness. That is like a whole hour-long talk right there. Okay, let's see. Probably the shortest explanation is because of what it's doing to your blood sugar. So it's not even so much like that specific food itself, but it's what happens when you digest and absorb that food. It spikes your blood sugar level. And again, once in a while, if that happens, it's fine, right? Like our bodies can adapt to this on occasion. But if that's just kind of chronic, like there's lots of sugar coming into the body, then high circulating blood sugar is the issue. Like high circulating blood sugar can suppress immunity and can increase inflammation and can just cause sort of irritation in our blood vessels, right? So I think the easiest way to explain it is it's a blood sugar issue.
Okay, great. How would you know if you're sensitive to a food? Would that show up? Like, what are some of the symptoms that your body would manifest?
Yeah. Well, I would say typically that manifests digestively. That's probably most common that you would have some sort of chronic digestive complaint. And that could be anything, right? That could be constipation, it could be bloating, it could be loose stools. I mean, it could be anything that just doesn't feel like a normal, right, digestion. So most often it comes up that way, but not always. I would extrapolate that a little bit further to say if you have any kind of chronic inflammatory issue. So if you're having a lot of skin issues, let's say like rashes or eczema or things like this, or if you have a lot of pain, like chronic pain or arthritis or headaches, or I don't know, even autoimmune stuff, it doesn't mean that the food necessarily caused all that. Like, I don't want you to think that it's not always cause and effect, but it could be that you're having a hard time digesting certain foods and they're creating this irritation and inflammation in the body. You can do blood tests. So you could do a test to try to find out what your body might be reacting to. I think that a lot of times what I do with people is just think through some of the more common culprits and then maybe just try an elimination for a few weeks and see if you notice any improvement, right? And the most common ones would be gluten and dairy. But also corn is not that uncommon. Soy is another one. And then I would say even eggs and like nuts are sometimes an issue for people. So it's not always super obvious, which is definitely the hard thing about food sensitivities.
Okay, great. All of this information that you've shared about the immune system, would that all of this holds true for children and adults, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Someone asked, can you repeat the dose for the Nordic Naturals algae omega-3? Do they have an algae?
They do. They do have an algae oil. Yes. So I would say in general, I try to aim for a total omega-3 content of somewhere between 1 to 2 grams. So that might be, like varying EPA, DHA, but I try to get the total in that kind of sweet spot. I think that's where you really start to see some therapeutic benefit.
Okay, great. Okay, someone asked a question concerning sleep. What about when you have to get up to the bathroom 3 to 4 times a night? Does that mean you're not getting good sleep?
Because you're hydrating so well, which is a good thing, right? We didn't talk about hydration, but of course that's important too. Such a good question. I mean, kind of, it is interrupting your sleep, right? Like it is interrupting that like length of deep restful sleep. It doesn't mean though that when you are sleeping, you're not getting good sleep. Hopefully you are. Hopefully you can fall back to sleep pretty quickly. I think that would be good. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The peeing thing at night is such a hard one. I'd say first, like maybe just make sure you're not drinking too late into the evening. Like, can we minimize that a little bit? Yeah, I'm sorry. That is a hard one.
Great. What's your take on diet sodas?
Yeah, it's ultra processed, right? And so I'll tell you guys, I didn't put this in the talk, but I would say just as a general rule of thumb, I don't, I don't expect, nor do I think you have to be 100% perfect all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't have to be perfect to be getting the benefits. But what I really try to encourage people to do is think of it as the 80-20 rule. It's like, what do you do 80% of the time? 80% of the time, are you filling it with all that stuff we listed out, right? Are you getting good sleep? Are you exercising? Like, is 80% of the time good? If it is, your body has what it needs for the occasional whatever, right? So that's kind of the diet soda for me. It's like, can it stay in the 20%? Like, or is this kind of a daily, multiple time a day thing? And if that's the case, then yeah, it's not going to be helpful.
Great. It's also just all the non-nutritive sweeteners wreaking perhaps havoc onto the microbiome, which
absolutely
that is on that.
Absolutely.
Someone asked, what is EGCG?
Oh my gosh, I can't pronounce this.
Yeah.
Do you know, Jeannie, can you say it?
No.
I can write it out for you guys if you want.
Yeah, it's
a polyphenol, so it's a type of phytonutrient. It's just a really long word. And so it's been abbreviated to EGCG, but it stands for kind of the active constituent that's in green tea. I'm sorry, I can't remember it off the top of my head.
okay. Mushroom supplements. Did you, I don't know, host defense?
Host defense.
Host defense. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They come in little packets, right? Or I think there are some packets that you can make like
you can get some powdered. You can get powdered mushroom complexes. The two that I probably recommend the most on host events are actually capsules. So they're not powdered, but you can get powdered and then you can actually mix it into your, drinks or smoothies. I don't know, whatever.
Great. Is there a blood test to know if you have enough omega-3 in your diet?
There are some tests. Yes, there are some nutrient tests you can do. Whether that is under the standard insurance paid tests, I'm not sure. Maybe not. I don't know. You'd have to ask your doctor if you're like, I really want to know this. But there are some functional labs that will look at omega-3 levels. Yes.
Great. Okay. This is probably a common concern that like maybe adults have with younger children. So this is my 11-year-old grandson's very adverse to vegetables. He's very active and healthy. Since he is young, he started eating some frozen vegetables, like frozen corn and peas. He will eat some tomatoes and does like fruit. Do you have any suggestions on how to increase?
I know it's the picky eating thing. I mean, even for adults, picky adults too, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. I do have 2 kids too, so I can relate, and they're 11 and 10, so same kind of age range. Okay, well, usually particularly if I'm working with kids like together, you know, if I'm their provider and we're kind of having this conversation together, first I just try to help them understand, and I do this with my own kids, why. You know, I mean, first they have to have a little bit of buy-in. So it's not just because I think you should be eating vegetables. It's like, look at all this stuff that it could help you with. So first is like, you just need to set the stage of like, why should you care? And then I really start with like, let's just start with the stuff you like. Like, I'm not going to force you to eat a bunch of stuff you're not into. Let's start with what you like and see if we can get something in each color group, right? So I like use the rainbow as kind of a chart and be like, can we pick just like one thing? So like you said, like tomatoes, maybe corn for the yellow, peas for the green, right? It's like, let's just start with one thing in each category so that he starts getting it on his radar that like, okay, I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be eating these foods. And then can we gradually add on? Can we gradually expand? And there's been different strategies I've used with different kids over the years. So one thing is maybe having an incentive system where you reward them for trying new stuff, you know, so maybe they like work towards something that they want, and not that they have to eat it all, but like they're just willing to try and experiment. I also find getting my kids involved in the cooking can often be helpful, or like at the market, having them help me pick out stuff like what looks good, what looks interesting, what should we try this week? Like getting them engaged in it, right? Like it's an experiment for the whole family. It's not just me telling you you're supposed to eat your spinach. And then I would say worst case scenario, or maybe in the interim while you're trying to get him to be more open-minded, is can you add veggies to things that he may not notice as much? So could you make a smoothie that has some things in it that, you know, are a bit hidden, or in a sauce or a pesto or something where it's kind of in a more favorable form, but you could like sneak in some stuff. I mean, pesto is a great way to get greens in kids, you know? I mean, usually they like pesto and they'll slather it over their pasta and then it's got a bunch of greens in it. So it does take some creativity, but I hope that's helpful.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about hydration and its impact on health and or the immune system?
Yeah. So yes, I'm sorry I didn't include that in the, I was just like food focused, you know? Hydration does matter for various reasons. You know, there's kind of a whole list of things that are influenced by our hydration levels. But when it comes to the immunes, well, I would say twofold. So even like going back to that previous question about sugar and blood sugar, right? The immune hydration is really helpful at keeping blood sugar moving through the body. So even just in like kind of helping to dilute your blood and keep things moving better. Obviously, it's a kind of an indirect way, but hydration can help with that. When we're dehydrated, a lot of different cellular functions go down. You know, they're not their rates decrease. So that includes our immune cells, but it also includes like just even our cognition, you know, like our ability to think. I mean, there's so many things that are impacted by hydration. So I think as a general rule of thumb, you know, it does matter. And it's when you're well hydrated, you will optimize your cellular functioning on all systems, right? Immune included.
Great, great. All right, so, you've gotten a lot of kudos as a great
Oh,
presentation.
good. Thank you.
I'm not reading that, but I
Thank
just
you.
want to
Thank
throw that
you.
out there for you. So someone asked, their teenage son has recently gotten into nutrition and health and is looking to gain weight. What do you recommend are healthy foods for weight gain?
Yes, great question. As you can imagine, this comes up a lot for me with my cancer clients too, right? So I will say I do have quite a few recipes in the book that are specific to helping you gain weight. So that's just one resource to know that's available. I really try to think about, so two things. Adding more fat calories, so adding healthy fats and oils to the diet is going to add calories without adding more volume, right? So if it's just kind of too hard to eat bigger portions or to eat more food at any one time for your I think, was it grandson or son?
It's their teenage son.
Son, sorry. Then I would say to try to add in more fat and good fats, right? Like olive oil or avocado or coconut or like grass-fed butter, like just put it in everything, so that's probably the easiest way to add calories. Then maybe eating more frequently, adding more snacks to the day can also be helpful. And adding in starch calories too, right? I mean, I think a lot of times when we start cutting back on carbs is like one of the ways we lose weight, right? When we're trying to lose weight. So sometimes we might need to add more carbs, but obviously good high fiber carbs, right? Like low glycemic carbs. So whole grains or starchy vegetables or beans and like things that have high fiber content. So they're not doing that like sugar thing that we're trying to avoid. But that can definitely add like weight calories. So I want you to think of it twofold. It's like the fat and the starch, and then maybe eating more frequently. And then maybe even adding in like a high calorie smoothie or something as one of the snacks could be another way to just get like a big dose of calories in at one time.
What do you think about adding like chia seeds or hemp seeds too? Because it's a healthy fat and a healthy protein.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you can add those
Nuts, right?
smoothies.
Like different nuts, seeds, nut butters. Absolutely. Those are great options.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, do you have an opinion on the benefits or harms of eating 2 eggs per day?
Mm. Oh, that's such a controversial one. Whoever asked that. Okay. Well, so I think it's a little bit difficult to answer that just because um, there's different risks associated with eggs depending on what we're looking at, right? So if you happen and this is I don't even want you to think like the cholesterol stuff because I mean I think we pretty much know that like eating cholesterol is not necessarily contributing to high cholesterol unless you're just not metabolizing your cholesterol well. I mean that could be a scenario. But again, for me in the cancer world, I have to be kind of mindful of eggs because eggs have been kind of connected to some hormonally driven cancers. So here's what I kind of suggest across the board. I love eggs. I eat eggs. We're getting chickens so we can have more eggs, more fresh eggs ready to go. So I'm not anti-egg, okay? Just to be clear. I do think with any animal food that you're going to eat, the quality is of the utmost importance. So having it be organic, having it be pasture raised or grass fed, I mean, completely changes the food, right? It's like not even the same food. Okay. So when you have a really high quality egg, it might still have the same protein and might still have the same fat in it, but it's going to be a more anti-inflammatory fat, right? It's going to have a different percentages of fat in it. So that's kind of first. It does need to be really good quality. And then I'm a big advocate of rotating your proteins. Like I think anything you do every day could potentially become an issue. Even if it's not like leading to disease, it could just be creating a sensitivity or an intolerance in your body. So I really believe, like, for example, for me, I do eat eggs. We had an omelet tonight for dinner with vegetables and salad. So full disclosure. So yeah, I think eggs a few times a week, fine. But like maybe not every day. Maybe rotate in some other options. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's good. Okay, this is a good question actually, concerning fasting.
Mm.
Um, the question is, if I skip breakfast, I would be fasting, but I heard it's not good to skip breakfast. So what should you do? Because I think it was at the conference that we were at where it said like eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that some of the newer, well, let me just back up and say, um, there is a lot of research to show that even skipping breakfast could be helpful as far as just fasting benefits go. The caveat with it not interfering with your metabolism, which is kind of the concern about not eating breakfast, is that you really have to stay hydrated. Like you have to be incredibly mindful of your hydration when you're fasting. And what I usually have people think about is to try to have at least like 8 to 10 ounces of fluid every hour you're awake when you're fasting, right? So you're really kind of being mindful of that. That's going to help with the metabolism piece. But you're right. At the conference that we went to, and since then, there's been quite a bit of research showing that when you combine fasting with our circadian rhythms, right, with like how our body metabolizes food best, there's even more of a benefit. And what that has shown is that in the morning at breakfast time, we actually do digest food really well. We use up blood sugar really well. We don't like get insulin spikes the same way. Like basically we have a better metabolic response from food in the morning than we do at night. So if it's reasonable for you, and I know that feels harder, a lot of people are like, I'm not hungry in the morning anyways, like I can skip breakfast, no problem. Skipping dinner might feel like a little bit more extreme. But technically, with this circadian rhythm research, it will give you more benefit. So if you were going to skip a meal, like if you were going to do a fast long enough that you're skipping a meal, ideally it would be your evening meal. And maybe it just means that you could still be eating dinner, but maybe it's just like a really early dinner, right? And it's not as big, like it's a lighter early dinner. And then you go through the night and have breakfast the next day.
Great, great. That was good. Good explanation.
Okay, good.
How much does garlic lose its properties if it's chopped and then refrigerated ahead of using? You know?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Do you know
I wonder
that?
if it would lose it. I mean, I wonder if it would be similar to frozen fruits and vegetables where they're picked at their peak nutrient level, flash frozen, and then when you eat frozen fruits and vegetables, you're eating really high nutritional
Yeah.
content.
Yes.
So I wonder if you chop it
Well,
yourself.
maybe if you were going to freeze it, maybe that's the kicker. Like if you chop it and then freeze it, maybe you would have that benefit you're saying. If you put it in the fridge, my guess is it would preserve it for a while, but I think anything in the fridge, right? Like each day it's in the fridge is like losing nutrient content. I mean, it's true for anything. So, but I don't know exactly. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, good. Let's see. Someone asked, I take vitamin D, mushrooms, probiotics, elderberry, and fish oil daily. Will they cause any trouble with the COVID vaccine? That's a good question. I mean,
I don't know.
I think anyone knows.
I wouldn't think so, but I don't know. But those are all great immune enhancers. So well done.
Right. Thank you so much for this informative and helpful talk.
Yay.
How about this? What's the impact of fried foods on the immune system? French fries, for example.
Yeah, so that kind of falls into that. If you remember, I sort of lumped together the processed food and the harmful fats. So harmful fats do tax the immune system, in addition to other things. But basically, anytime a fat's been fried or heated too high, it doesn't even have to be fried per se, but just heated too high, it oxidizes, right? It turns rancid. And it creates kind of a toxic response in our bodies. So I would say kind of for multiple layers, like multiple levels, that could be problematic for the immune system. And I mean, I didn't really speak to that today, but something I do talk to my cancer patients about quite a bit is, particularly when we're thinking about recurrence prevention, is just thinking through, anything that's going to tax the body, particularly toxin wise. So if that's like fried fat or processed foods or whatever it is, right? Or just like pesticide stuff. But anything that adds a toxic burden is requiring the attention of the immune system. And if the immune system is like constantly distracted with this stuff, it's not necessarily doing all the other stuff that we want it to do. Right. So that's kind of how I think of those sorts of fats.
Okay, good. So you mentioned that coconut was one of your top
Mhm.
10 immune foods. This is, just to be clear, this is coconut, not coconut oil,
Oh no,
correct?
it could be both. It could be coconut meat, coconut oil, it could be coconut milk. It's basically the fat in coconut. I mean, obviously there's different types of fat in coconut, but it's the lauric acid is found in the fat of coconut. So it could be actually either of those options.
Because I was under the assumption, or what I've read and learned, that we should really minimize our coconut oil usage to occasionally, like not as a regular oil, not as an oil that we use daily.
Mhm.
Um, so, and mainly it's because of the cholesterol issues that can manifest.
Yeah, because of the saturated fat. So with coconut oil, it's a little bit different. So it does have saturated fat, which is why it's kind of always been lumped into that category of be moderate or be mindful. But it's the saturated fat is actually a medium chain triglyceride, which is metabolized a bit differently in our body, opposed to just sort of standard animal based saturated fat. And what they've found is it seems to be digested and absorbed and used more efficiently than traditional saturated fat. So, at least from the studies that I've seen, I haven't seen any correlation between coconut oil intake and then increased risk for heart disease or other sort of saturated fat type, concerns that we might have, even within the cancer world too, right? Because there's some concern with saturated fat and cancers as well. So I know it's a bit confusing. I mean, at least in the online space too, I think it's a bit confusing, but I really don't see coconut oil as something that we need to avoid. Personally, I don't tell people to do that, but I think as I certainly approach everything from this moderate perspective, in that I think rotation is kind of the answer to everything, right? So it's like we don't only use coconut oil, but we do sometimes. And then we also sometimes use olive or we use avocado or, I kind of believe the more variety, the better anyways.
Great. What are your strategies for spacing out meals or snacks through the day?
Mhm. Well, I mean, if we think about just the way sort of physiologically we digest food, I know there's always exceptions, but let's just say on average, most of us, usually if you have kind of a complete balanced meal, so it's got all the pieces, right? It's got protein and fat and fiber, it's not missing anything. That usually takes anywhere from 4 to 5 hours to digest, typically. So the goal is to really kind of not eat before you finish digesting what you ate before. Ideally, like, so you're not just constantly digesting all day long, right? You kind of digest, you take a little break, and then you eat again. So I really try to get people to go kind of every 4 to 5 hours. Sometimes, depending on I find that usually between breakfast and lunch, that's kind of okay. Sometimes between lunch and dinner, that might be harder. If it's a bigger stretch, you might need a little snack in between to kind of tie you over. But unless I'm trying to help someone gain weight, I'm a big fan of not really snacking. Like ideally, we sort of eat our meals. We focus on hydration between our meals, and that helps us sort of minimize the need to snack.
Great. Someone asked about fasting in regards to the benefits of it.
Mhm.
Is it the longer the fast, the better, or is it just the act of fasting?
Yeah. So it depends on what we're looking at. I would say any type of fast has shown benefit in the body. And again, I've focused primarily on the cancer research, but to me, I feel like the cancer research kind of translates to a lot of other stuff too, because if it's improving metabolic markers like lower blood sugar and lower insulin and lower inflammatory markers, then obviously that benefits a lot of different diseases or conditions, right? So I think like we see that level of benefit at any type, any length of fast, where the immune, like that immune regeneration that I was talking about before, they're still, I mean, honestly, they're still kind of trying to dial it in with the studies. I would say we've seen some of that happen at around like 20 to 24 hours, we see more of that happen at like 2 or 3 days. So it definitely seems like a longer, more extended fast seems to do more of that stem cell reboot that I was talking about. But to be fair, I think the research is still a bit in its infancy. Like we still don't know for sure. And so rather than just encourage people to go like straight into a 3-day fast, which might be kind of crazy if you've never fasted before, I'd say just start with the overnight, like start playing with intermittent. You are getting benefit. There's no doubt. And as you're able, and as we get more information, right, about the kind of the sweet spot, then we could work on going a bit longer.
Fabulous. All right, well, maybe we'll stop there.
Okay.
So Dionne's information will be up on my website. I will put it out in the email tomorrow. I will include the 4 recipes that,
Yeah, good.
4 recipes, and all of her contact information. Follow both of us on our social media. She's the Rustic Dietitian. I'm at Soul Food Salon. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Dionne, thank you so much. This has been
You're welcome.
a wealth of knowledge that you've shared on all of us. And I guess if you guys find that your questions weren't answered, I tried to get to most of them. Some of them were a little specific and I didn't think it was appropriate for our broader
Well, you can
audience.
shoot me an email if you want.
Do you want to share your email right now?
Sure. It's support@therusticdietitian.com.
Great. Okay, that's it.
All right. Thanks for having me. It was so much fun.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.